Hello and welcome back. This is Barrett from the C4 Cyber Club here at Cypress College. In this video today, I'm going to cover the Security Plus Lab series, analyze and differentiate types of malware and application attacks. So this lab, it's going to cover two different pieces of malware. We'll be looking at the shell shock vulnerability and the torn rootkit. Now, first, we'll dig into the shell shock. To do this, we're going to have to launch the security onion machine and the Ubuntu machine as well. But first, so what is shell shock? So this was also known as bash door. It was a family of security bugs in the Unix bash shell. The first of which was disclosed back in September of 2014. So it's been around for a while. And as long as you're updated on your version of Linux, you should be good. But when this was released, shell shock could enable an attacker to cause bash to execute arbitrary commands and gain unauthorized access to many internet-facing services such as web servers that use bash to process requests. So attackers were able to, for example, get a dump of the Etsy password file that has all of the usernames and things like that. You can get access to the file system, all sorts of bad things. So we'll take a look at that first. So let's go ahead and get these machines up and running. My password. Okay. Because we are going to come back and view a little bit of incident response logging once we've executed some vulnerability scans and exploitations using the shell shock malware. So we'll want to open terminal up top here, put a terminal emulator. And we just want to make sure that the security onion services are running. So remember from previous labs, whoops, not services, just service. From previous labs, we use this to go through intrusion detection systems and look at the logging to see what kind of scans were happening on a network. Okay, so that's all good. We got the green light on all of those. Now we'll move to the Ubuntu machine. Secure password is the password. Okay, great. So this is the machine that we are going to be exploiting. But first we can take a look and see what version of bash, of the bash shell, are we currently running on here. So say echo $bash version. So essentially what we're calling here is a variable. So if we press enter, we see that we're running 4.2.25. And I believe the shell shock vulnerability, it says here the system is running the 4.2.x family, which is susceptible to the shell shock vulnerability. I believe it was updated in 4.3. All right, and we can actually run a test script here. So we'll move to the scripts folder, do a long list in here. We see the shell shock test script here. And we can see right away we are vulnerable to four different CVEs here. If you remember, CVE stands for Common Vulnerabilities and Exposures. So next up, we can kind of demonstrate and know for sure if it is vulnerable to this specific vulnerability by running this small script. And then we could just type in this script, which will get into the details here just a moment. You want to make sure you type this. I would recommend following how it looks down here. The spacing up here could be a little bit off, but definitely take a look down in the screenshot here. Oops. Okay. So we could see that it printed out these two lines. So what does this script mean? Well, first, let's take a look at the actual CVE, and it might end up making a little bit more sense about what's happening here. So this is the NIST database here. I found this, I believe this was the top Google result. Definitely a good source of information for CVEs. So you can see current description, GNU Bash through 4.3 processes trailing strings after function definitions in the values of environment variables. Remember this envx. This is basically setting an environment variable here. And then what follows is essentially the vulnerability. And if this can execute, then what it's doing is it's passing everything else afterwards. So that's where you'd see situations where malicious code was then passed through because of this vulnerability. So you can see here, which allows remote attackers to execute arbitrary code via a crafted environment. And this could be done through, the web server, DHCP clients, even through OpenSSH. I do have another example up here, which is a good example of an HTTP request that you see the code here followed by the request, which is to, send us the etc password file. And you can see when you get the response, it's giving you all of that information here. And then you see here, what does that mean? Well, the attacker was able to execute operating system commands through an HTTP request. Okay, so, and essentially that's what the lab is having us do here. We're testing out that environment variable vulnerability that executed. So anything after this semicolon will also execute, which is just basically us echoing out the word vulnerable and echoing out the CVE name. So because we see that, we know that this version of Bash is indeed vulnerable. Okay, so next up, we'll actually exploit this machine. So let's move to our Kali box. We'll go ahead and open up our web browser. We will go to the Ubuntu IP address. Okay, now we see, there is a web server here. I wonder if they are running CGI and if we can maybe have access to their bash shell through the web server. We could type in CGI bin. Whoops, if I could type. Oh my gosh. There we go. Bash example. Okay, so this is good news for an attacker. We see that we have this capability. So now we go to terminal. We're going to have to activate our local loopback. So if we do ifconfig, we see right now it is not active. We type ifconfig lo up. And if we look at ifconfig again, we see the local loopback is now activated. And we will work with the W3AF, essentially a vulnerability scanner, but also exploitation framework. Those of you who may have used or seen Metasploit before, it's kind of similar to that. We'll go to cd opt w3af. And we will go ahead and initialize that console. And this may take a moment to load. So essentially, give a little bit more information about this tool. It essentially stands for the Web Application Attack and Audit Framework. Okay, we see it's loaded up there. This is a open source web application security scanner, which provides both scanning and exploitation, like I mentioned before, for web applications. It provides information about security vulnerabilities for use primarily in penetration testing engagements. Okay, so that is up. We could take a look at the Shell Shock plugin. We'll move into the plugins folder, type in audit, Shell Shock. And then move back to the command prompt. And we'll need to set a target. So that, of course, is going to be the Ubuntu machine at that CGI bin bash example. (192.168.1.50) / CGI bin bash example. All right, now we go to back. And so you see the configuration has been saved, and we can just go ahead and click, type in start. Okay, so that was essentially the scan, and you see Shell Shock was found. It gives you the value, so you can recognize that. And now we can simply type exploit. Move into the exploit folder. Type in exploit OS commanding. And you see here, rather quickly, vulnerability successfully exploited. We see the username of this machine, www.data or dash data, sorry. We see the exact version of Linux. So from here, we can interact, basically kind of like where we have a shell. So we could say, who am I? We have the username there. We could check for the present working directory or print working directory. We are currently in that CGI bin folder that we just exploited. We could list all of the files in the root folder. This is everything on, remember, on the Ubuntu machine. We could take a look at the, etc password file by catting that out onto the screen. So this would be another way of getting this kind of information. We could pull up all of the users on this machine. Kind of similar to taking a look at etc password. And then once we're done there, we can just exit and exit. Great. So now that we've exploited that machine, we ran a vulnerability scan, all of that stuff, we definitely made a lot of noise. Let's move over to our security onion machine. And we can open up Squeal and take a look at that and see what it picked up. SOA admin, password is my password. We want to select all on these networks to monitor. Go ahead and start that. Great. So I'm going to go ahead and sort this by the most current date and time. And so what we can look for, we set this show rule, show packet data. Move this so we can read a little bit more. We should be able to find something related to shell shock. All right, and you see in some of these packets, we have here possible CVE 2014-6271 attempt. We see shellcode. Oh, I'm sorry, that was from previous scan. We see possible Etsy password via HTTP. But specifically these packets referring to the CVE number, and remember that is specifically shellcode or shell shock vulnerability. So this is a good example of when you're running an intrusion detection system like this, you're running Security Onion, you're looking at these logs, it could tell you very specifically what kind of vulnerability you need to look out for, what may have been executed, and what you're going to need to patch. Great. Okay, so that takes care of part one of the lab. Next, we're to move into the torn rootkit. Let me go ahead and switch over to Kali, close this. Go ahead and clear screen. And we will move over to the CD home malware directory. So keep in mind, we are working with an actual rootkit here, so make sure you don't do this at home. It's best that you're working with this within the sandbox environment, within the NetLab. So first thing we want to do, if we do a long listing, we see this tk.tjz. So we need to uncompress this. So we'll run tar the xvf tk.tjz. All right, so that output everything into a tk folder. You can see that there with the blue. So we'll change directory over to tk. And if we take a look, this is all of the various files related to the rootkit. We could take a look at the README file. So you can get more information about that. Check out the nice ASCII art there. And now essentially what we'll do, obviously nobody would actually do this in real life, but we're going to initiate the rootkit on this machine ourselves. But essentially this would be done maliciously by an attacker without your knowledge. We'll say torn vuln 9999. Okay, so that was pretty fast. Backdooring completed. So now we can access the damage of this. So essentially what a rootkit does, it will create a lot of hidden directories, hidden files. It's going to change how some of your applications or tools work, it may actually completely remove them, as we'll see here in a second. So if I change directory into what is known to be a hidden folder for the torn rootkit. Now, normally what I would do here is list the directory, right? Well, you see here /bin/ls, no such file or directory. So the bin folder is where all of these tools are located. We can see that the rootkit has removed it. So we don't even have the ability to list files in a directory. So we can move into another hidden folder. Once again, still are not able to list out the directories there. So let's see about using another tool called RKHunter, short for Rootkit Hunter. And let's see if it can detect that the torn rootkit is installed on this machine. So we could take a look at the help file here. Thankfully, we could still run this. As always, getting help on these new tools is useful to get a feel for the various options you have. So we could just run a check on this, RKHunter -- check. And you're going to see it's going to run various scans on this machine. We've got a couple warnings popping up. Okay, press enter to continue. Okay, so now it's actually checking for rootkits. Actually, while it does that, let me scroll up here. You can see these warnings are on a lot of these bin folder locations. So, top, unhide, ifconfig is disabled. There's our ls mod, netstat is removed. PS for taking a look at running processes is removed. And so now as it checks for rootkits, and this is really incredible, you see all of these different rootkits that exist out in the wild that this RKHunter checks for. And now we see here torn rootkit. It's given us a warning, so we know we're in trouble there. Okay, it's going to do some additional checks. All right, and so that is it for the RKHunter scan. You'll notice that it found 10 suspect files, possible rootkits 2. So we have the torn rootkit, and it's detecting a backdoor shell that's installed through SSH. So at this point here, the best recommendation is really to wipe the machine completely, wipe the drive completely, and then just reinstall from a restore point or a safe image. So yeah, that is about it for this lab. Once again, we covered the Security Plus Lab series, analyze and differentiate types of malware and application attacks. And once again, we went over both shell shock and the torn rootkit. Great, thanks a lot for watching. See you next time.